and Naesoj usually kicks us off.
Yeah.
So our meeting is streaming live on Facebook.
Are we live?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to another Thursday community conversation. This week, we have Counselor, of course, Dr. Gayl, a co-host, and our other youth liaison, Alondra, also the youth poet, Ware, but she'll introduce herself. Anyways, this week, we're talking about sexual assault in Boston Public Schools, as well as other places in other environments that youth are in. So we can just get straight into it, and we can start with introductions, and I'll kick it off to Alondra.
Hi all, so it's Alondra. Again, I'm one of Counselor Julia Mejia's other youth liaison and Boston's Youth Poet Laureate.
Thank you, Alondra. And Alexandra?
Hi, my name is Alexandra. I'm actually one of Alondra's peers. I go to Fenway, and so I'm here as an ally.
Thank you so much. And Ariella?
Hi, I go to Concord Carlisle Regional High School, and I'm here because of Julia and Naesoj, and I'm just going to be like talking about experiences today. Oh, I'm also 16. Yeah.
Thank you, Josie.
Hello, I'm Josie. I go to New Mission, and I'm 16. I'm here because of Naesoj. I'm an ally.
Thank you, Scania.
Hello, my name is Scania. I'm also 16. I go to John D. O'Brien High School. I'm here to be an ally as well.
And lastly, Gio.
I'm Gio. I'm a junior in at Boston Green Academy, and I'm here for Naesoj.
All right, and Dr. Gayl and Counselor, if you guys want to introduce yourselves. I'm sure they know who you guys are by now.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Gayl Crump-Swaby. I'm a clinician in the Boston area, and that's what I do. Thank you.
Counselor?
Hi, yes, I am Julia Mejia. I'm a Boston City Councilor at large and really happy to hold this space for young people weekly. Thank you, Naesoj and Alondra, for leading us in this space. We really do appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Counselor. And I'll kick it off to Alondra, who's going to start us off today.
All right, guys, so just to start off with a bit of a broader question, basically asking you guys how you feel about the issue of assault in BPS and a bit of the pros and cons of how you have witnessed and how you feel schools have handled these incidents in the past. And I'll start with maybe Scania. And as we go along, you guys can just feel free to sort of start off by yourselves, but for now, I'll pick.
Okay, so personally, I feel like it is a very undermined issue. So it's a lot more prevalent than it seems to be just because either people choose to ignore it or they like just pretend they do not see. There are several times that I've heard of other students like telling me where they'll like blatantly tell somebody to like leave them alone or like stop during class, and the teacher will just like look their way and like mind their business. So it's little things like that. But at the same time, if you go to administration, they tend to acknowledge the problem, which I have to give them credit.
Thank you, Scania. And I don't know if anyone just wants to pick it up or I can move on to.
I guess I could like pick it up.
Yeah.
So I think it also has to do with like teacher and student relationship. I think if that was like stronger, or maybe like, I think that sometimes, especially when you have new teachers in like BPS, they feel like sort of, I guess, like uncomfortable in the environment, that they have to get used to it after a couple of years. So they feel like they can't be on their voice as much when they do see those things happening in the hallways, to the point where you have to go to like a higher administration to talk about your problems. And I think that if like that bond or that relationship was better and teachers were calling it out, then there wouldn't be as big of a problem with BPS.
Thank you, Ariella. Gio?
Hi, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so basically just asking how you feel about, you know, how assault is handled in BPS thus far, some of the pros and cons, and just how you feel about towards the situation as a whole.
I feel like it definitely does happen, but staff doesn't pay as much attention to it as they should.
Thank you, Gio. And Alexandra?
Hi. I feel as if there has to be better communication between students and faculty, and there has to be, I feel there should be certain guidelines put in place for these situations, because every school handles it differently, and I feel if they had something in place that was secure, it would be I don't know how to explain this, like if they had a system put in place where they I don't know how to explain this right. I'm sorry. I'm like getting so trippy. So let's say I had an incident a few years back, and the student wasn't, like, I feel as if the disciplinary actions that were put on place on the student wasn't what should have been done. So I feel if they had placed a system of how do we discipline these kids when these things happen, then there would be less incidents. There you go. That's what I meant to say.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you for sharing your experience as well. And now Josie?
So my take on it is I feel like in general there's not a lot of, because there's a lot of like,
Josie, you're breaking up. We can't hear.
hello?
We can hear you now. You were just breaking up for a little while there.
Okay, my bad. I'm outside. Okay. So personally I've never experienced anything like it. So it kind of flew past my mind. So I feel like there definitely has to be a lot more awareness when it comes into sexual assault within the school buildings, and it has to be talked about, like a whole talk about consent and how things actually are, and how you could differentiate what teasing is and what sexual assault is. And I feel like that's really important to talk about. I don't know if you guys caught that, but yeah.
We got it. Thank you, Josie.
Thank you, Josie. Naesoj, if there's anything that you want to input.
Yeah, I think I would just have to echo what Josie said around, like, definitely being able to differentiate sexual assault and teasing, and just knowing the difference. I think as far as it goes, like in the BPS system, I don't think there's enough education. I don't think there's enough education around it. I definitely don't think there's enough conversation around it, and it definitely it's bad that we have to have students feel like they have to turn to social media to have their voices heard. Not saying that it shouldn't be a big thing, but schools should have done or acted accordingly before students felt like they had to go and get the eyes of the counselor and the superintendent and all those people, is what I'm saying.
Thank you, Naesoj. And
can I say something really quick before we move on from that? And I really do love Naesoj's call out in terms of how important it is for young people to feel heard and validated when things are brought up. Because I think Josie also makes a great point, is that sometimes people don't have a real clear understanding of the definition of what is teasing, what is sexual assault. And I think that sometimes people do things, they think that they're being funny, but in actuality, they're being disrespectful. And then when people don't take your concerns seriously, then people feel like they can't trust the people who are supposed to be there to protect them. So I think, and what I'm hearing Josie say is that, and Naesoj too, is that we have an opportunity and a responsibility of making sure that in our schools that our students understand what crossing the line looks like. And also, I believe the young woman from Fenway Joy, your friend from Fenway.
Alexandra.
Alex.
I think one of the things that I think it's important too, as we continue to have this conversation, is making sure that everybody knows what the consequences are, and that those consequences are laid out, and that it's always going to be fair. It's not just going to be like, oh, this one is going to get away with it because we just know that that's how they are. You know, we need to be consistent about how we address these issues, so that young people aren't confused about what is right and what is wrong. So I really do appreciate what I've heard so far. And Naesoj, thank you for bringing it into the space so that we can have this conversation. I will say though that we've been really clear before we started that Brady, I believe that there might be some other folks who are going to come in, and as we come into the space, I'm not sure if we have all of our speakers here. Naesoj, do we have all of our speakers here already?
Yeah, they're all here.
Okay, so there's nobody else coming to join us? Okay, so for those folks who are following us on Facebook, you can make your comments on Facebook, but please don't name people. If you know of a friend that has had the situation, don't say their names. If you're talking about a specific school, don't name the specific school. If you're talking about a community center, just try to keep it general and don't just close anybody's information during this time or on Facebook, because we want to make sure that people feel safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. And just, again, sort of reiterating all the things that I've heard. I've heard a lot of different things about some of the lack of communication, the lack of student and teacher relationship. I've also heard a lot the word, that idea of tolerance in these different places, whether it's a school, a workplace. And that sort of just leads right into my next question about, in my personal experience, it almost seems like assault is very widely tolerated and sort of brushed over, whether it's a school, a workplace, just in any place that I'm in. And I guess my question to you guys is if you agree with that, and if you feel like the spaces that you've been in, if your peers tend to tolerate it, and if that's the case, why do you feel that people tend to tolerate assault? And anyone can feel free to start off.
I'll go ahead and start off answering your question. So I feel like it's really heavily tolerated, partially because people aren't educated properly on the matter, and partially because it's just historically it's been very tolerated. And with the whole educational part of it, I agree with Naesoj as she was saying that it needs to be more talked about. It needs to, you need to create a safe space where people can talk about it. Personally, in my time in BPS, I've spent my whole educational career in America in BPS, and I have not had a single class regarding sexual assault, harassment, or rape, any of that. I haven't had a single class teaching me about any of those things. All of the things I know about the topics, it's because I've done my own research on, or from outside programs. So part of the reason why it's tolerated is not only because people don't know what it is completely, because it's so not talked about, but also because historically it's just boys will be boys, or and the stigma around men not being able to be sexually harassed or assaulted. The stigma is horrible. And it does happen to men. Even though it happens proportionately more to women, it doesn't mean that men are excluded from it happening. But because historically it's just boys will be boys, or it's that can't happen to you, you're a guy. So it's because of the stigma surrounding the topic, it is tolerated, because just historically it's been tolerated and nobody's really changed it as much. It's not as tolerated as it once was, but it still is very much tolerated in my opinion.
I agree with that. Thank you, Scania. Is there anyone else who wants to sort of pick it up from there?
Yeah, so what I was going to say is basically studies have shown people who sexually assault or offend, they start off by doing very small things. For instance, going into a grocery store with someone else and trying to one second, Jenna, and trying to rub their shoulder on you and see what's happening there, and see if that's something that they can get away with. So I feel even quote unquote smaller aggressions, I don't think groping someone is a small aggression, but touching people and stuff like that, that's just the start. And if that is I think it's tolerated because, again, it's just like so widespread. It's common. It's like as children or as like younger people, you know, when you're like in kindergarten and everyone wants to be very like touchy with each other, I feel like there was never any line drawn with that. Like it kind of stayed with us and it developed and it just kept on going as we grew up. And that's just like a habit that we have. However, like that can grow into different forms of sexual assault, such as like rape, like molestation, different types like that. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Ariella. And just sort of adding a little bit onto what you said, and it's also what Scania said, I think if there's something that, this is why education is so important from a very young age, because again, it's like when you get used to sort of the curiosity of a child just to touch into whatever and all that great and wonderful stuff. I think that there's also, you know, just amongst children, there's a lot of misconduct as well, sexual misconduct that goes undetected and that is very much ignored as just children sort of playing around. And I can say, you know, as someone who saw that, who experienced it, who went through it, that's where it begins. It begins with children. And I think that a lot of what we're seeing now is older individuals, both whether they're teenagers, whether they're adults, kind of acting out whatever it is that they felt, learned, experienced when they were children. And, you know, it becomes a greater issue, just like you said. It's like those smaller aggressions then turn into bigger, wider issues. And then that's why you get people who are in jail for many, many years for committing horrendous different acts of sexual misconduct. So I thank you for that. Anyone else want to pick it up or?
Yeah, I think I would just say, Alondra, I agree with everybody when they're saying because it's been tolerated for so long. When I think about that, I think about even just like our parents passing it on to us. Like I remember telling my mom about the situation. She's like, well, what exactly happened? And I told her what exactly happened. And she's like, that's sexual assault. Like she's kind of like y'all generation, like it, like she just like she's baffled by the specifics of like how specific it's gotten. And like to her, what is such a small like offense is like, to us, that's a big offense, basically. And I guess I would kind of want to bring Counselor and Dr. Gayl in on this one, but I think it's just how different generations have looked at sexual assault. Because even hearing my mom say like, oh, really, that's all they did? Like, that was kind of like, what do you mean, Mom? Like, that's a big deal. But she wouldn't look at it like that because the generation that she's in, and she's kind of like, oh, you kids think like take everything like to the head. And I'm like, no, Mom, like it's been a problem since you were young. You just didn't look at it as a problem. So I guess Counselor and Dr. Gayl, I would just ask you, like, how do you think it's been passed on for generations, like the toleration?
Yeah, so one of the things is that you make a very good point, Naesoj, in terms of the importance of looking at it from the perspective of, you know, how one generation understands it and how one generation sees it. So I would bet that your mother, someone told her that, right? So what she's saying to you is because someone said that to her, and what the other person said to her is because what someone else said to her. And a lot of times, especially in certain cultures, but especially within the Black and Brown communities, we don't teach our children about the fact that their bodies belong to them, right? So as they get older, they have this, they don't have the sense of what's on my body belongs to me. And oftentimes, you know, there are times when parents may say, go give Uncle Johnny a hug, or go give, you know, your cousin so-and-so a hug. And the child may not be comfortable with doing that, but because the parent, the adult, has said, go give so-and-so a hug, then already you're taking away some level of control and power from that child to be able to say, no, I don't feel comfortable giving Uncle Johnny a hug, or I don't feel comfortable giving Aunt Susie a hug, because maybe they've had experiences with that. And then to talk about, you know, like you were saying, Naesoj, that someone did something inappropriately, because in terms of how you experienced it, it was inappropriate. But for someone from a different generation, they may not see it as inappropriate. And that's where those lines of miscommunication get crossed in terms of how do we begin to teach our children that their bodies are theirs and they have a right to say, no, I don't want to give Aunt so-and-so a hug, or I don't want to give cousin so-and-so a hug because I don't feel comfortable doing that. But it's when we begin to force our children to do that, we are taking away their power and their control. And another thing you mentioned was about schools not doing enough around this particular issue. I know oftentimes schools talk about they're doing the health classes, but what they don't realize that sexual health is just as important as any other parts of health that you begin to talk about. And if you're excluding sexual health from that conversation, basically what you're saying that we don't need to teach you any responsibility for anything regarding sexual health. And so that's where the schools are lacking in terms of being able to integrate sexual health. And then the other piece to that is that then it becomes a traumatizing experience for that person who may have been assaulted, whether or not the other person thinks that it was minute or minor. If for that person, if they experience it that way, then for them, it was inappropriate for them, it was uncomfortable for them. So then therefore, it's for us as the adults to really be able to speak up and hold other folks accountable, whether it's a young person or an older person. We must hold each other accountable for these kinds of things, because what happens is that gets caught in the person's sort of psyche and how they begin to look at their bodies, how they begin to think about themselves, and some sense of feeling no lack of trust and their ability to then even form relationships later on in life, because these experiences have happened and no one was able to help them through that process of understanding that. So it's a trickle down effect. And just one other thing I wanted to add to as well, the same way that within work environments, that they expect everyone to get some type of sexual harassment training, even though those trainings are usually online. And so I can go into what that is about and, the fact that that may not be as effective, but it's the same way they should do this kinds of stuff in schools, because young people are humans too, and their hormones are raging. They do have sexual feelings as well, but it doesn't mean that we don't teach them how to manage those sexual feelings, how to be able to respect someone else's body, because a disrespect to someone else's body is also a disrespect to yourself and to your own body too as well.
Thank you, Dr. Gayl. Counselor, did you want to speak on that?
Yeah, so just really quick, can you hear me? I'm like multitasking, looking for my daughter's situation here. So just two things that I just want to add and offer to the conversation. One is that I don't think anyone has the right to tell us how we feel. And I think that the moment that someone minimizes what we've experienced as a violation, and they try to downplay it, then what they're doing is telling us how we should feel about it. And I think as a parent, I'll speak as a parent, when my daughter, I think, was 3, I had to participate in a video around private places, because I wanted her at a very early age to understand what feels uncomfortable. And I think I got a little bit of pushback from some folks because they thought that my daughter was too little to be engaged in this kind of conversation about her private places. And I felt as a parent that I wanted my daughter at a very early age to understand what feels right and what doesn't, and to then be able to name it and speak up on it, so that I know that it's at the very least, she would be able to do that, right? And I think that it's very much deeply rooted in a cultural belief, and it's not just age and generation. I think it's also cultural. In certain cultures, that norm where folks can just think that they can do whatever they want to children, that it's acceptable when it's not. And I think that when you grow up in spaces with that type of mentality, it's really hard for you to protect your own children, because that's not what you learned along the way. And so I think it's both generational, Naesoj, and I also think it's cultural. And I also think that for me, and I'll speak for myself, that as a parent, it was really important for me to teach my daughter this at an early age. And oftentimes there is no guide, there is no handbook, there is no how you should show up, right? And I think that Gayl is exactly right. This type of training should be done in the schools, and they should be done in community centers. And it's not just about bullying, because everything can just be like, oh, that's just bullying. Nah, man, let's really talk about how people feel when they are violated. And sometimes kids are joking where they like smack your butt and they think that's cute and everybody laughs, da 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 da, because that's just part of the culture and you think that's normal. But when you don't call things out, they continue to happen. You create the type of environment that other young people think that that type of behavior is acceptable. And I think when adults don't take those things serious, then you minimize the experience of the young people who are reporting it and sharing it.
Thank you, Counselor. Alondra, before you move on to the next question, I just wanted to ask the young people on the call, where do you think the education system or Boston Public Schools as a whole, or headmasters and principals are lacking when it comes to acknowledging sexual assault in schools?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Josie.
Okay, so I kind of wanted to add on to the other question, but I guess it kind of also goes into this one. I feel like in general, the BPS like education system when it comes to sexual assault overall like lacks in like tolerate or like has like a sense of toleration to victim blaming, and we see that a lot happen where like for example there's the whole idea of like, oh, you shouldn't have done that, or they try to teach a lesson when someone tries to confront with the issue. So I feel like in that sense, if you're gonna like also teach stuff about consent and like just sexual health, you should also talk about like the fact that you shouldn't victim blame and like blame the victim if someone is coming up towards you and telling you about their experience, because we also see many instances where a lot of victims decide not to confront with what happened to them because of the fact that they're scared that their story might be looked over as a way of them being dramatic or that they're lying. And we see that in way too many instances. So I feel like breaking that stereotype and that normalization is very important too, and teaching that is also very important.
I guess I could go. So this is my own opinion, but I think that like sometimes teachers don't prioritize independence. And that's because like I don't think some teachers really believe that students can produce like a certain amount of work or that they can put in a certain amount of effort to get somewhere. And I think that that is how they like, I think teachers and administrators are a part of peer pressure. And I think that ultimately peer pressure is another thing that leads to sexual assault. Like I mentioned this a lot, but when people are touched inappropriately, it usually happens in a big crowd. And the person who is touching you is usually doing it because they think it's okay, because they're like getting gassed up by a bunch of other people or based off of peer pressure. And I think that like if teachers did better on like trying to connect, obviously it's hard to do that, like if you have 100 students, that's really hard. So I don't think that that's not necessarily what I'm asking the teacher to do, but you should pride everyone on independence and making their own choices rather than modeling it after a certain student in class. Jenna, what's going on? Okay, sorry. So basically like when you have like in classes, they'll be like, oh, you should be like this student. And I think that that's problematic. And yeah, I don't know if I quite connected that, but I have to, yeah.
No, that's beautiful.
Thank you so much, Ariella. Alexandra or Skanda, did you want to speak on that?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was just, where do you think BPS or headmasters and principals are lacking when it comes to acknowledging sexual assault?
I've known a few situations where simply the communication wasn't there, where students have gone up to administration and they have told their stories and they just weren't heard out. And so I think that is one of the problems where, teachers, instead of having biases to take that out of the equation and realize, this is, why would this child want to say such a thing, such a serious accusation of a teacher? And and knowing, if this is a lie, that's going to be problematic. I don't think any child would lie about being sexually assaulted. And therefore, I think, teachers must also get training for how to handle those situations. And when a student comes up to them and tells them, such a hard thing to say, when you've been traumatized like that, it's hard to speak, especially when you're afraid that someone's gonna, put you down. So I think that could be a solution, is teachers taking programs and those trainings.
Really quickly, I had another thing to say. Like, administrators, they really have like a lot of pride, and they like their pride for their school and their pride for themselves and their jobs. They put that over kids' personal experiences. Like, when you go to talk to an administrator about a certain situation, it's more like, no, I know the students here, I know the administrators, and they wouldn't do that because I have made sure that that's not going to happen, or this is how I've modeled to the other people. And they put their pride on top of like personal experiences, which ultimately undermines students. So say that your friend was sexually assaulted and you were sexually assaulted, and your friend isn't getting the type of response that they need in order to feel comfortable in the environment. That's just going to spread to the other youth in the school, which is ultimately how you get that group of people who aren't speaking about it.
Real quick, I just wanted to echo what Ariella and what Alexandra were saying about pride and about bias. If that's something that I have seen, which is so prevalent both among teachers, among students, among whoever it is, they're so quick to say, no, so-and-so would never do such a thing. So-and-so would never say such a thing, would never act in such a manner. And that is such a dangerous way to think, because so-and-so can and does have the ability to say and act in such a manner, especially when you don't know what so-and-so's background is. It isn't always that someone is necessarily being malicious, but again, it's that cultural, that generational thing. If you were taught that something was okay, sometimes you will do something not necessarily with malicious intent, but feeling and actually thinking that something is okay. And that needs to be corrected, because oftentimes I've seen in my personal experience that happens. And even, the way that I grew up, that can happen with children who were exposed to these things very young, whether it was from an older person or just between children, which often goes overlooked because, again, it's between children. So then when they get older, like I said earlier, they just sort of repeat that. And then it's so hard to get to administration and other students because they're so quick to say no, because they are afraid of their perception of that person changing. And I feel like if we ever want to get somewhere with this issue, we have to stop saying that, no, my friend would never do that, or no, my coworker would never do that, because then you are discrediting the real experience of someone else. And there could also be something really wrong with the perpetrator on a completely different level, and that can go into a bunch of different things and a bunch of different, diagnosis, and that needs to be addressed. And we can't just sit here and say no because you think that a student is going to come up here and lie. And I see that happen a lot. I've seen this in my personal experience, where if there are students that are considered problematic in the school who come to an administrator and say that they saw something, then the administration will say, no, well, this student is problematic, so we're not going to listen to what they have to say. So you're going to discredit what that student is saying when they're speaking up for somebody else, mind you, because you think that they're just trying to ruin someone's life and career. Even if that is the case, you have to actually investigate it. You can't just brush it to the side. And that is something that I have seen and personally experienced. And it was really sad, because it was just like, it almost felt like the situation went nowhere when it was so serious. So I just wanted to sort of add on to that. And if there's anyone else that wants to answer Naesoj's question.
Yes.
I have to. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to say, like, I definitely agree, and with what Alondra was saying, because people need to also like have an open mind and understand that people might show different parts of themselves to different people. So it's like anybody's capable of anything, anybody can do anything. But then I also feel like part of the problem here lies with trusting administration. And honestly, I can't blame students for not having like a secure adult, because what if, like, for personally, I've seen teachers come and go. Like teachers change literally every year. Administration changes so constantly. Even some schools, like their headmasters, like change consistently, and it's really heartbreaking to like think about having to start forming a connection and start forming a bond and start trusting an adult just for them to like be placed somewhere else, or like just for them to like find a different job. And I've had this conversation before. It's like different programs, but it's understandable that teenagers don't want to trust anybody in the building because it's like, oh, they're just gonna leave. And half the time they do leave. So it's like, I get it. I understand why people don't want to come to administration and don't have the adult they like trust and feel like they can go to. So that's also an area that the system like that we can work on in general.
I would like to add, I've also noticed that, family members and parents have a lot to do with the normalization of sexual assault. I know for boys in particular, when a teacher hits on you, it's a good thing. You should be applauded for that because you're getting a grown woman. Things like that should be also looked at, that parents and guardians see these things and, tell their children, no, this is not a good thing. This is a grown woman, a grown man, and they should not be doing these things to you.
I want to, Gio, I want to ask you, like, as a male in BPS, do you ever feel like the male side of sexual assault is ever like discredited, or that your experiences are ever like invalidated?
I feel like as a male, like we don't really like care for sexual assault because it's like, oh, if a girl touches your butt, like you have the right to touch her back. Or if a girl flirt with you, you flirt her back. Like we just like were groomed to think that like sexual assault can't happen to us. But in like reality, like some males like suffer from like past past issues or like past situations. But like as being a male, you can't like as being a male, you're gonna think other males think you're soft because you don't want a girl touching you, or they're gonna think you're weird. So I think it just goes under being a male that like you can't like males can't go into sexual assault.
I think what Gio's saying is like it's very real. How do we get rid of the stigmas that males can't speak up about the assault that they've been through, and just how do we realize that like protection needs to go both ways, and that understanding needs to go both ways. How we shouldn't be understanding a female more than we understand a male's experience, or protecting a female more than we protect the male, especially in the BPS system. And I think of a lot of scenarios. Where boys and girls will play, and a boy will kind of just be like, "Oh, stop," and the girl will keep going because they think like, "Oh, this is my guy friend. Like, he doesn't care. He must like it," or something like that. So all I think about is how do we get rid of those mindsets. But I guess that kind of leads in. Oh, Counselor, did you want to speak?
No, I just you know what I'm thinking? I always love when Naesoj and Alondra have ideas of things that they want to talk about, because I'm really thinking that this conversation is going to require a part 2, and this conversation is going to require us to invite some educators and some administrators to join us in this conversation, because I am loving and learning so much just being in this space. But if we're not centering this conversation and creating space for people who can learn a thing or two from y'all, right, and your realities and what you're sharing, then we're doing a disservice. And I'm glad that we have educators who are listening in and who are participating, who are cheering you on Facebook, who are actually hoping that you all go on tour and bring what you're learning into your schools. Just, I'm telling you, this is what I've been seeing in some of the Facebook comments. But that this is going to take, if we're really going to address this issue, an opportunity for us to have these conversations with folks who aren't used to hearing directly from those who are living the realities like you all. So I'm really looking forward for that to happen, because I think this is the time for us to right these wrongs, Naesoj, and this is our moment to really ensure that when you guys go back into your schools or into community centers or wherever you happen to go back into, that you feel safe and heard. And so I'm here for all of it. And I want to share one comment that is on my personal page. from Tammy Santiago. She says, I commend these young ladies being so brave, well-spoken, and courageous. Girls, you are speaking for the ones who can't. Continue to use your voice. And that was before she heard from Gio. So Gio, I'm sure she's saying that to you. And here's another comment on Facebook: is difficult conversations are hard for everyone and need to be practiced. Most adults aren't adequately trained to discussions regarding sex, especially inappropriate sexual behavior and general harassment. We all need practice. We all need to practice difficult conversations. Someone else said here, Alondra, that you were their student. You were like the best student that they had. Let me find out. You got a little fan club up in here. And a lot of folks are resonating with the things that you guys are talking about the administration too. So kudos to the dialogue, and you know, just wanted to let folks know who are tuning in that we're hearing them and just bringing their voices into the table. Sorry, go ahead. Thank you.
So I just wanted to ask. Sorry, Alondra. I kind of like. Did you want to ask your next question? Oh, okay. No, I just wanted to ask this next question. Kind of like So earlier this week, I made a very ignorant statement that kind of came off like that was saying one-time consent is all-time consent, and a lot of people checked me on it, and I was glad. So I guess what I'm asking is, for those that make those ignorant statements like I did, how do we make sure that it's an environment where everybody's opinion is accepted, but that we're making sure that everybody's kind of like on the same pages. What I mean by that is, I think a lot of people seen it as if I was like their opposite, or if I was like opposition to the movement, or as if I didn't have the same objective and goal. And so what am I saying is, how do we come together as a community to accept every lens and still not be fighting the people that are on our sides? And anybody can kind of take that.
Part of that for me is teaching people how to have a progressive conversation. So like class debates, I know we have a lot of those. Like in my whole like school experience, I've had a lot of class debates and like Socratic seminars and things like that. But I think something important is being able to teach people that, first of all, opinions are opinions. So everybody's entitled to their opinion, whether you agree with it or not. And you can have a conversation with somebody and disagree. And you can share your side with somebody and be like, okay, I see where you're standing, I just don't agree with you. Like, that's okay. So I feel like we need to push on, like in the educational system in general, or like socially in general, we need to teach people that it is okay to not agree with somebody. And if you feel like somebody is ignorant, or if they like, if you feel like you have more information on the matter, or more educated on the matter that they're talking on, it's okay to educate somebody respectfully. And just outwardly being like, you're stupid, you're dumb, like that's not helping anybody, first of all, because then the person is just like, okay, what am I doing wrong? And they're like, you're stupid, don't talk to me. So, and it literally gets you nowhere. It's a waste of time. And yeah, I'm just trying to say, like, people can have progressive conversations where they can inform each other. And at the end of the day, an opinion is an opinion. It isn't right or wrong. It's an opinion. That's the whole point. Everybody has their own opinion, and that's okay whether you agree with it or
not. Okay, so I guess like I can. Oh, what were you gonna say? Were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was saying, I was like, I love y'all. I was
just gonna say, unfortunately, we're about to lose Josie. So I just want to say, Josie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Bye, guys.
Ariella, you can continue.
Yeah, so basically what I was gonna say is, like, anytime you have a community and there's like an ally to that community, I think that what the group needs to do is also, everyone needs to get trainings on what it means to be an ally and how you can bring that ally into your group, because it's not just sexual assault, right? There's multiple different areas, such as, like, for instance, the Black Lives Matter movement. When you have allies trying to voice their opinions, whether that be because like they're ignorant or because they really have genuine questions, a lot of that is just like automatically negated. And that's the problem, because instead of educating that person or saying, you know, I respect, like what Scani was saying, like, you know, I respect your opinion, but I feel like if you had like these tools, or if you have this information, you wouldn't have these opinions. And that's where a lot of people can get, like, I feel like, just really clouded in their minds. I think, like, for you as an ally or as someone who's just trying to like talk about the conversations, obviously at the initial point, like if someone feels disrespected by your words, they're going to be very frustrated at the like in the beginning, they may still be frustrated with you, but I think continue to try to have those conversations with them, because like, how do you build a coalition if you're not acceptive of allies, right? You always need an ally to help you when you're in a group. So yeah.
Alexandra, Alondra, or Gio, did you want to speak on that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, my question was just so Gio, I know at the beginning of this week, I made a very ignorant comment that came off as if I like blame victims, or as if one-time consent was all-time consent. And kind of what I'm saying is, how do we use that example to kind of make sure that our environments are inclusive and accepting of all lenses and all diverse opinions when talking about this topic?
I think that before you should like say anything, like before anyone should say anything, they should think how it's gonna affect other people, because not everyone has the same opinions on things, and especially with like a gender thing, like a male might not see something that a male might not feel the same way about something as a female would.
Thank you,
And
Gio.
how you need the experience to understand.
Thank you, Gio. Alondra or Alexandra?
I mean, I feel as if you voiced your opinion in a manner that wasn't disrespectful or wasn't trying to be disrespectful, that they carry on that conversation and they try to clear up, okay, what exactly are you trying to say? Because you might have said this, but you don't, maybe how I took it isn't how you meant it, So having deeper conversations about, those things that will offend you or do offend you, to go a little bit deeper when you're having that conversation.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah, no, I stand in agreement with everything that's said, and Gio said something that was really interesting and sort of stuck with me. When he says something along the lines of like how a male is going to see something is different than how a female is going to see something, and I know that oftentimes some people might not necessarily agree with that with that statement, but it's the truth. And I think sometimes when we have these like discussions and these conversations, we're so quick to be like, no, like we all need to have the same mindset. And I'm like, no, that's not how that works. Like, I'll never forget having a conversation with a student years ago who was racist. And the stuff he did was so overtly racist. It was like crazy. But I remember, despite the fact that he really upset me several times, I sat down with him and I asked him, I was like, why do you think the way that you do? And he froze. He was like, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, I'm just asking you a question. And he broke down and he started talking about his personal experience with his parents and basically how his past experience led him to think the way that he did. So that whole conversation opened up a whole nother discussion with him about just like, so then why do you treat the people around you this way? And then it became this whole thing, and it really opened my eyes too, because I was the type of person to be so quick to be like, oh, well, you're ignorant. You don't get it. You don't understand. And we're leaving crucial voices out of these big discussions because we think we know it all. And when you do that, you are limiting the amount of people that we really need to push this forward, as well as people that also need healing. And I think that when we talk about the male voice in terms of sexual assault and sexual misconduct, it often goes unheard for that exact reason, that I think sometimes both male and female are very quick to jump on a male and say your opinion or the way you see this is wrong or incorrect. And that's not the way to do that, because I think that we were all conditioned to think a certain way about these things, and you can't discredit someone's experience. And this is the exact reason why people that I know, males that I grew up with, like who either were perpetrators or victims, and were probably victims before they were perpetrators because they were really young when all of these things happened. So even the word perpetrator, I take that very, very lightly when it comes to children, because if they're just repeating what they saw, and that's an issue. So then they get older and they sort of carry all of these things and their opinions, and then you see the silence, and I've spoken to other males who are so quick to be like hesitant. They're like, I don't know how to talk about this discussion. And they get like really nervous. I've seen that before. And I'm like, no, like, it's okay. Like, I don't mean to make you nervous. And whether it's because they experienced it or they saw it, or sometimes even the guilt, sometimes the fact that they've had people look at them and tell them, what you're saying is invalid. So even, with whatever that statement that you said, Naesoj, in that moment, there's a difference between, I don't know how people approach you or not, but there's such a difference between, and we have to be so mindful of that on how we approach the things that people say. And I know that sometimes it's difficult for someone who went through that experience to approach someone who's saying something that they can perceive as ignorant in a calm, understanding manner. I'm not saying that you have to. Honestly, if you're someone who has gone through something and you're seeing someone say something that hurts you, I don't think you should respond. But I think that people who are allies or people who have seen these situations, they should, because they can respond in a manner that is patient, that is loving, that is understanding. And that's what we need. You cannot, I don't care how ignorant it sounds. I don't care how mean they sound. I don't care how hateful they sound. You cannot, because you will go nowhere, speak to people in like a rude or aggressive or super critical manner. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to change their mind. They're not going to be on the same page as you. They're just going to feel attacked. And you don't even know why they speak or act or think the way that they do. And there's probably a lot of things in you that other people would perceive as ignorant. So it's just about having understanding in all of these conversations, because none of us really know what we're doing. We're just picking up the pieces with as much as we do understand.
Can I respond to that? Just the ending. Well, I guess like I disagree in some way, like you saying you cannot speak to someone in that manner. Personally, I feel like if I meet a white supremacist and he's talking about some I hate Black people, talking about, rape, he likes to, I feel like this is very, I don't want to use vulgar language and things like that. I feel like I have a right, I think it is a human response to say, well, I don't like the things that you're doing. I feel disrespected right now. I think the problem is a lot of people aren't able to move on from those experiences. They're not able to sit back and say like, this person is probably saying this because of all the things that you mentioned. But like, if someone's being treated unfairly, I don't know if like the right approach is, it's hard. It is not an easy thing to do. And so to ask a lot of people to do that, I feel like we need to take, I guess, a little bit smaller steps to get there. So yeah, that was just my opinion.
Thank you. Counselor, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just really quick. There's one thing that I learned many years ago, which is it's using I statements, especially when it's dealing with difficult conversations with folks who may think differently than me. And it's, I know, I feel, I want. I know really acknowledges that how the other person may be thinking or experiencing something. I know, I feel, because nobody can tell you how you feel. How you feel is how you feel, and nobody in this God's green earth can push you on that, because those are your feelings. And then the I want is what you want to get out of that conflict or that situation, or where you want, how you want to stand firm in something. So I know, I feel, I want are three key things that have helped me have very difficult conversations with folks who weren't ready to hear what I had to say. And I think that oftentimes we walk into spaces and we're so afraid that we're going to hurt people's feelings that we minimize ourselves so other people can feel comfortable. And when we don't name things, then we hold on to them. And I think that what I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing Alondra talk a little bit about, it's the how you have those difficult conversations with people in a way that they can hear you. And if we're utilizing the I know, I feel, I want, it's just a technique that has helped me have very difficult conversations with folks. So I just want to offer that as something for you all to think about as young people, and even as adults. I know, I feel, I want. Just keep asking yourself, how do you have this conversation with someone that makes you feel uncomfortable? If you keep it grounded on the I statements, I know, I feel, I want, you might be able to make a little bit of headway.
Yeah, just to add to that, to also add, I know, I feel, I want, I need, because sometimes you may need to walk away and to say, I can't be part of this conversation right now because it's a way of my self-preservation. So I need to walk away from this. Yeah. Right. And there's this book called Difficult Conversations. It really talks about how do you have these kinds of difficult and courageous conversations. And what we are really talking about here is communication and how we communicate with each other. And so often we listen to respond and not necessarily listen to really hear what the other person is saying. So we are busy trying to figure out what our comments or our feedback or what we're going to say. So then we miss the opportunity of what the person is really trying to say. So it's really important that when someone else is speaking at you, we sit, we listen, we take it in, and then take a moment to respond to it. Because what we end up doing is react. We react in a way that makes it come across as either antagonistic, or then we fall into discord. So it's important when we're communicating that we are listening and we are hearing what the person is saying. So I just wanted to add a little bit to what Julia was saying. And both Alondra and Ariella is right, because part of what Ariella is saying, that I need some self-preservation. If someone is saying something that feels as it's attacking me in some way, then I may need to walk away and maybe go back to the person. If you have an opportunity to go back to the person and say, what you just said made me feel this way, and I experience it this way. And going back to what Alondra was saying was in terms of how do you still have that, how do you still communicate with that person? And how do we take the time to really listen so that we hear the other person's perspective and where they're coming from, because their worldview might be very different from our worldview. So it's really about communication and how we do that.
Thank you, Dr. Gayl. And I just wanted to bring up a point that Alondra made that really stuck with me about her saying that we don't all have to have the same mindset. And that stuck with me because I had someone tell me, like, after I explained myself, I had them tell me, I'm glad we resolved this, but like, I still don't want to talk to you because I just can't talk to somebody that doesn't believe the same things as me. And I completely understood where they were coming from, but I was kind of taken back a little bit, because I'm like, even after this, you know that I'm on your side. We have the same objective, we have the same goal, but because I don't see the issue through the same lens as you, now you're kind of completely shutting down any conversation or collaboration between us two. And I'm like, we have to stop doing that, because ultimately we're shutting down our allies, and we're cutting ties, and we're burning bridges to people who aren't our oppositions. They just don't look at things in the same views. And I just wanted to bring up what Scania said about progressive conversations. I think that's so important, and I think it's also important to know the role that you play in a conversation. Scania, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but Scania and I actually had a conversation after that whole situation, and she told me, and she was like, I thank you for your apology, but like, this is kind of like, an apology doesn't make up for like all that you caused by saying like what you said. That's not exactly the words that she used, but that's what she said. And I completely understood that, because I was like, if I wasn't me and I had seen that video, I would have thought the same exact way as everybody else was thinking. So I couldn't even blame them. And for me, it was kind of like, no apology amounts to how you made that person feel in the moment, but how do we move past that? Because even after an explanation, how do I not cut you off? How do I move past that? I've seen a lot of people, like, we can disagree on a lot of things, but like racism and sexual assault isn't one of them. Well, it's like, I'm not disagreeing, I just don't see it the same way as you. So how do we take those two opinions, those two lenses, and kind of make it a collaboration so that we reach the goal that we want to reach at the end of the day? And I wanted to bring you in, Counselor, just to ask you a question, like, as somebody that is in the limelight, and you kind of do speak for a lot of the Boston area, or the entire Boston area, that one word that you may say that's wrong in the public eye, how do you come back from that when you have people kind of twisting your words and taking what you said and completely making a new message, even though that's not what you meant?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we all struggle with is, like, you know how people say, you said that. I'm like, no, I didn't say that. You heard that, or you interpret that in the way that you interpreted it, but here's what I said, and here's what I stand by, and that's it. I think that what I have struggled with is that there's a lot of police toning. It's not even about just what we're saying, it's how we're saying it that people want to have some concerns with, if you will. But I think Naesoj, what I struggle with most as an elected official, and one that only won by one vote, so you know, every day I got to prove why I'm worthy of being in this space, is that I have no qualms in calling people in to the conversation when they have either misinterpreted what I was communicating. But it is what it is, and you know, I think that as a city councilor, I feel like I have a very different way of being. I think that for me, I don't see myself as a city councilor and an elected official, and I have to be a certain kind of way. The same way that I am in these spaces is how I am in every space that I'm in. So I think, that switch up in terms of what I said, I don't have to worry about, because I'm going to say the same thing no matter what environment I happen to be in. I think your question is about when people try to trip up and take my words out of context, which it does happen in the news, because I'll say a whole bunch of things and then they take one little segment of what I said and take my whole situation out of context. And then I have to spend some time helping educate people. Well, here's the whole story. You just got a glimpse of it. And I think that that's my responsibility in making sure that at least my audience and the people that I serve and that I represent understand fully where I'm coming from. And I think that that's how I utilize my social media platform, is to make sure that people understand what they heard and that it is exactly what it was supposed to be, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Counselor. I just want to acknowledge that we're losing Scania. Thank you so much for joining the call today and offering your opinions and ideas, Scania.
Oh, I didn't know if Scania was going to say something. But I wanted to say it also has to do with like the language. I feel like when you try to talk about your experiences or how you're feeling about something, you get a lot of, well, are you sure? Like, is this exactly what happened? And I feel like people need to be trained on their language and like how they're interacting with the youth, because again, like that can be very you can undermine someone's situation, well, their personal experience and context to what happened. So I feel like that's one way that we could like really, really improve like the BPS system, that language. I know Noonie and I have, and I'm sure a bunch of other people have been trained on like different ways in which you're speaking to others. Like recently we were talking a lot about using and statements rather than but statements, right? Or however statements, because that can really like close out the way that you're trying to acknowledge someone. And I feel like a lot of teachers actually don't know how to do that. Like using the I statements, like Miss Julia Mejia was talking about, like I feel like people need to be trained in those ways and they're not. And I don't know, this is also a thing that like the union and BPS, I feel like teachers get away with a lot because of the teacher union. Like, yes, we do need to be protecting teachers because they can be targeted for their like beliefs, opinions, because of their race. But at the same time, I feel like the union protects teachers from the way that they may treat a student, whether that's like the teacher putting their hands on the student, even teachers sexually assaulting individuals because of the union. So I feel like there needs to be a different way in which we interact with that.
Going off of what Ariella said, when that idea of having training around language is so important, and that sort of leads into, my next question on basically how we can better spread awareness and then implement some of these educative trainings and resources, whether it's in BPS or community centers or, our workplaces, basically some solutions that you guys can sort of come up with on all of these different, ways of spreading awareness and trainings that we have brought up, sort of sprinkled around in the conversation, how we can, sort of push for these different things to be implemented. And I kind of want to start off with Gio, since we haven't heard from him as much. I don't know if you guys heard me. Did you hear me?
Yeah, we heard you.
Okay. So Gio, if you wanted to start us off.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
You're good. So basically, throughout the conversation, we brought up different types of like trainings and ways that we can spread awareness. And basically now the question is like other solutions in terms of, whether other ways of spreading awareness and other ways of training, whether it's, how Ariella mentioned, like language training, but besides solutions themselves on how to spread awareness and types of trainings, but also how we can push for these things to be implemented, both in BPS as well as in other places like community centers, workplaces, etc.
I think workshops for males and females at the same time, because a lot of sexual assault situations happen after being uneducated. So I think that workshops, like educating students about what it is and how you can contribute without knowing, would help and decrease sexual assault in places like that.
Thank you, Gio. And anyone else want to pick that up, whether Alexandra, Ariella?
Sure. So I think that it's like, it shouldn't just be a training for like teachers. It shouldn't just be a training for kids in BPS, although maybe that's like sort of what the conversation's more geared towards, because a lot of students, a lot of your friends, I wouldn't say enhance, but encourage sexual assault at your school. Like, again, a lot of people get sexually assaulted or violated in front of other people. And that's because the perpetrator's friends confirm that that is an okay thing to do. This is just personally how I feel. I feel like if you've acted towards someone that has made them uncomfortable or violated someone, I hold you as well as your friends accountable for that, especially if it happened in front of your friends, because like, maybe it's not just your friends, maybe you have had an experience in the past that has made you feel this way or made you feel like it's okay to do this to someone else, but like, who is giving you the okay to do that? Like, what environment is, and why do you feel comfortable doing that in school? And I feel like if you feel comfortable doing that in school, then there's something wrong with the school, whether that be your friends, the environment, the teachers. So everyone in the like area needs to be educated around those things.
Thank you, Ariella. Alexandra?
So, we spoke on, trainings, but we could also do petitions and having, the students in BPSs, telling, the superintendent or whoever is at the head, there's a problem within BPS schools and we need it fixed now. We need solutions now.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm sort of going back just a little bit because there was a question I wanted to ask Dr. Gayl specifically, and I just remembered it right now. Someone mentioned.
Can't hear you, Alondra.
She always goes silent when she's preaching.
Oh, God. How about now?
Yes.
I'm so tired of my internet. Wait, are you sure you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this question again was for you, Dr. Gayl. It came up into my mind again because someone mentioned the word early in the conversation, victim blaming. And my question was basically about how, I guess, what the effect of victim blaming language is on a person, as well as how, we, whether victim, ally, perpetrator, how we can
Alondra's having a moment.
It's all right.
I know, so funny she came in because she was like, they can't hear you, but you guys can now. Okay, whatever. Anyways. Okay, so the effects of victim blaming language on victims, as well as how we just as a collective, whoever we are in this conversation or in these issues, how we can like sort of retrain ourselves to not victim blame and kind of the type of language that we should be using versus what we already use.
Yes. So victim blaming, actually, what in simple terms, what it does is really shut down the person from even wanting to speak to their experience, because automatically when you go to someone and share your experience or your story, and then you start to ask them questions, already they are feeling as though, wait a second, this person is not believing me. This person is now, the way in which they're asking the question is making me seem as though I am the person who caused this to happen. So going back to the piece around language is so key and so important when we are speaking about things such as serious as sexual assault. And it's important to not ask the why questions, but ask, you know, how did this make you feel? What in what ways did it make you feel uncomfortable? In what, because then what that does is now give the person a sense of control. It gives them an opportunity to feel empowered enough to say, this is what happened and this is how I experienced this. So it's important not to make the person feel as though what they were saying is wrong, or even the way in which they might have approached someone was wrong, or even what they were wearing was wrong, or even if, and one of the challenges is that sometimes in anything, and we've all done this, where someone might ask us something and in the moment we may say, yes, we'd like to do it, right? So it could be maybe, yes, I'd like to go to this particular restaurant, or yes, I might want to have this to eat, but then we change our minds, and then that's okay, right? So it's really about giving the person some agency to say, some power to say, you know, this is what happened. This is how I feel about this, so that they don't end up feeling as though there's something wrong with them. Because what happens is that this experience could happen again and they don't share that experience. They don't tell anyone about it. So they continue to feel that it's something they did. It's their fault why they were sexually assaulted, when it's no one's fault. If you were sexually assaulted, it's not your fault that you were sexually assaulted. The responsibility lies on the person who violated you in whatever way they violated you. So then therefore, for those of us who are allies, need to be able to just listen, to hear, and to believe the person. Because when you act in a way that makes them feel as though what they're saying is not believable, it makes the person shut down, and then they walk away feeling like it was their fault, when in reality, it wasn't.
I wanted to know, Alondra or Naesoj or Miss Julia, can I ask a question to Miss Gayl? I don't know if that's what you go by, but like, say that you are friends with like a perpetrator or someone who has sexually assaulted, say that they did that a while ago, like how I don't know. So like, if you have someone who you know who has sexually like assaulted before, but you can see that they've like matured as a person, or they've tried to like own up to your responsibility, how can you, well, I can walk, I guess, in confidence, knowing that that's not the type of person that I am. And I guess, like, I don't know, how do you do that? Because I don't want to invalidate anyone else's story, but at the same time, like, you don't know what that person was going through. And when people also sexually assault, obviously it's not all about them, but they could also be going through a lot. So how do you balance that? Because I don't want to invalidate anyone.
Yes.
And then also, like, I don't want to say, I know everyone, if you feel like you've been sexually assaulted, that's you, right? Like, you feel like you have been sexually assaulted and I believe you. But sometimes there's not a perpetrator who is doing it like with purpose or like with conviction to hurt you. So if there's a story between two people, like, I acknowledge that you've been sexually assaulted, but like, I still want to operate with this person who has sexually assaulted you and ask them questions. And I feel like sometimes you can be targeted for that, or wanting to educate yourself or learn more.
Yeah, very good question, Ariella. And it's a hard line to toe. But I think what you're asking is, how do we hear and listen to both sides, right? And how do we give some sense of an opportunity for the person who might have, or the person who has sexually assaulted someone, to hear their voice too in the situation too as well. And if that person has gone on to shift their ways or to do something different. So basically what I would say, the same sense of respect and understanding and hearing out that you would give to someone who was victimized is the same way I would say be open to be able to hear the person who have been the perpetrator, who have assaulted the person, to be able to hear what could have been going on for them in their lives. Where did they might have seen or learned that this behavior was okay, right? Because someone may not have told them or shared with them or educated them that this behavior is not an okay behavior. They may have seen it somewhere and just had the belief that this was something okay to do until they get a sense of that it hurt this other person. Sometimes in some situations, restorative justice really works. It gives an opportunity for both people to be in the same space, but some people may not be able to do that. The victim may not be able to be in that same space because they're still healing from that hurt and those wounds that have happened. However, what could happen for the person who victimized the other person is give them an opportunity to speak from a place of apology, speak from a place of, if they have some sense of, if they're feeling a sense of, you know, what I did was definitely wrong and I want to make it right, in terms of saying to this person, this was going on for me at this moment. It doesn't make the situation okay. And it's one thing to let someone have an excuse for a behavior that they did, but it's also another thing to have an explanation. An explanation doesn't mean that you excuse the behavior, but it gives you a sense of understanding what was going on in this person's life at this moment in time that made them do what they did. Now, it's a different situation if someone realizes that they did something wrong and they continuously do it. That's a reason for more severe sort of mental health kind of treatment and other kinds of stuff that would need to happen. But if it's a one-time thing that the person did, you want to get a sense of what was going on in this person's life. What led them to really do this, to really act in this kind of way, and get a sense of, is there some level of not necessarily guilt, but feeling some sense of responsibility that they have done something wrong and now they want to make it right. So it's important, yes, to hear both sides, because you don't know what the person's story is. Everyone has a story, and we must be willing and open to hear what those stories is. Again, it's not an excuse, but you provide an opportunity for the person to have an explanation.
Thank you, Dr. Gayl. I just wanted to ask one final question before the closing, and that was basically just how we can encourage people who witness sexual assault to speak up, as well as how we can encourage victims to speak up, obviously keeping in mind that we might have to take a little bit more of a different approach in those two different groups of people. And anyone can start.
I think just making it clear that they're going to be believed and that they're going to be accepted, and that what happened to them wasn't their fault, and just like basically making sure that they're being comforted during that moment, because a lot of people feel like they don't have comfort and they don't have people to speak to, and just that nothing's really going to happen if they do speak up. So just ensuring that protocols will be followed if they do speak up, especially in BPS. I think BPS needs to do more to make sure that students know that their concerns will be heard and that consequences will be applied.
Thank you, Naesoj.
Could you repeat that question?
So basically the question was how we can encourage people who see sexual assault to speak out, as well as how we can encourage victims to speak out.
Encourage them to speak out, I guess, simply by unnormalizing sexual assault, by, creating conversations and safe spaces where, people can talk about it and not feel, strange or, any type of way about it.
Thank you, Alexandra. Ariella?
So I guess what I would say is like, I think that we should have groups, and that as a friend, we should encourage each other to be confident in ourselves and in our experiences, right? Because that's what makes you you. There's always going to be people, well, I hope that there's not always, but there might be people who like invalidate your experiences, and you can't always, combat that. But I believe being confident in yourself will really make you feel more comfortable in telling your story. So it's about your friends and who you surround yourself with.
Thank you, Ariella. And I think just to add on to everything that you guys have been saying, likewise, that whole idea of how we, approach someone that we know who maybe has come to us with that information, and just being sensitive about it, and,
Preach, Alondra.
Can't hear you, Alondra.
Well,
Did we lose her too? Or did she just?
yeah. Can we go into the closing? Are you okay with that, Alondra? If we go into the closing?
We got to work on
Just
Alondra.
go into the closing.
Okay.
Okay. Alondra, you were out there, blah, blah, blah. Nobody heard a darn on thing you said. Can you just like.
So we lost most of our panelists, but we still got Ariella and Alexandra. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming and offering your immense and diverse ideas and opinions. Definitely, like Counselor said, we are going to figure out ways to move forward with this topic, because it is important and it does need to be discussed, and awareness does need to be raised. I want to thank Alondra for being so on board when I first texted her, because she didn't even know what was going on. She's like, I didn't see anything, but okay, let's do it. So yeah, I just want to thank you guys so much. And when we end these calls, we usually just go around with a piece of advice or one word of advice. So that could be for anybody: victims, allies, administrators, principals. And Ariella, if you don't mind, we're going to start with you.
Okay. I don't know. I wasn't ready for this. So yeah, I guess just be confident in yourself and encourage your friends to be confident within themselves.
Thank you. Alexandra?
I would say, for those who have been sexually assaulted and, have been shut down, to continue to tell your story, because you shouldn't let anyone invalidate, what you went through, and to help those around you, understand what sexual assault is, and, how to, how to react, and how to create solutions for sexual assault.
Thank you so much, Alondra.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, so to the admin and to the teachers who are on this call, basically just, I hope you guys compile the different things that we said, and within your own environment, push for some of these conversations to be had. Our student voice is important, but your voice as staff is also equally important, and we need our higher ups to advocate for us in higher places.
Thank you, Dr. Gayl.
Yeah, I just want to add that it's important to listen to the voices of those who have been assaulted, and give them an opportunity to tell their stories and to tell their truth. And also just to administrators within schools, take a look at what college campuses are doing, because these young people will be going to college campuses, and you don't want them to wait until they get there to learn, to be educated about what sexual assault is and about consent. So I think we need to really begin to look at starting educating young people at the middle school, high school level around what consent is, what sexual assault is all about. And then at the elementary level, teaching children about their bodies. And I know some people might say that it happens, but we probably need to begin to look at it in a very different kind of way in how we do it. I know things about sex is always a taboo, but it's important to have those conversations, because sexual health is part of everything. So it's important to make sure that we include that in the education of our young people.
Thank you, Dr. Gayl. Counselor?
Yeah, so I just wanted to read a quick comment from my Facebook. It's from Ravine Golson, who has worked in the sexual health space forever. She actually gave me my first job a long time ago. And she talks about that we're living in a rape culture. We need society to believe in victims, and sexual assault, rape, and violence against women is about power and control. And I would like to just kind of bring that voice into this conversation. And she says that they have our Let Girls program, and Sister does work around this. So this is a program through ABCD, and Orvine Golson has been leading a lot of these conversations. Naesoj, I know you said one thing, but I just want to say a few, is that you have brought so much perspective into the space, and having this conversation around sexual assault, when you texted me this weekend and said that you wanted to bring it here, you know, I trust you and what you want to bring to the space, that I said, go ahead, make it happen. And I'm so grateful that we had this conversation, because these are not the sort of conversations that most young people are having, and that teachers struggle with, and administrators, and even young people. And so I'm just so grateful to you and Alondra for being so brave and bold and bringing this conversation to the space tonight. And with all things that deal with sexual health and sexual health education, I think that we need to continue to have and encourage people to be comfortable with being uncomfortable about sex. And we need to normalize these conversations, because we need to protect our children, we need to protect ourselves, we need to protect everyone. And the only way we can do that is if we can get real about things like this. So Naesoj and Alondra, thank you, and Gayl, for your leadership in this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Counselor. We also had somebody say that they would love to see if schools could have like anonymous like information, maybe like through a survey at each school, to see like how many students have witnessed and how many students have been victims of it. And yeah, I thought that was a very good idea. So I just wanted to put that out there. Maybe
we're gonna have part 2, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We should have a part 2, and bring some sexual. We should bring Irvine Golson to moderate some of the conversation, because she does a lot of work in this space. And then we need to bring those administrators and educators, because I think this conversation is going to require everybody to be at the same table having this dialogue. So I'm hoping that, you know, we can make that happen as a part 2. Do you guys feel good with that? Wait, I'm on the wrong view. Do you guys feel good with doing a part 2?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you
so much. Well, 7:30. Thank you again, Counselor, for giving us the space. Thank you again, Dr. Gayl, for joining us every week, and Alondra and our panelists. So yeah, bye guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.
Good night.